Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Our program today is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program is Understanding the New Deal, and it's being presented to us by the Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a collaboration between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It's a free series we put on every year from January through April. This is just a quick reminder that by participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived. We do keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel so that students and teachers can access them later. All right, we absolutely want you to participate today. If you haven't already, go ahead and find your chat box. It looks like a little caption bubble. Feel free to share where you're joining us from and what grade level you are. That'll be the easiest way for you to ask questions today, make comments. You also have the option to be on video. If that's something you're interested in, go ahead and leave a message for me in the chat and I will help you with that. Like I said, we want you to participate as much as possible. That said, just be really respectful of our interactive tools. We want to make sure any questions we're asking, any comments we're making, that they're directly related to what our presenter is speaking about today. All right, I just want to thank you one more time for joining us. This is our website. If you're interested in some of our upcoming programs, they're every Tuesday and Thursday through April. Or if you're looking for our recordings, you can find all that information there. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Jeff, who you came to see.
Great, thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining in today. Jeff Urban at the Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum in Hyde Park, New York. If you haven't been here, we're about an hour and a half north of New York City. So please get here, come visit. We have a great museum, the president's home is here, and we have a great wide variety of things to offer you if you're able to get here in person. If not, you can go to our website, and we have a great deal of materials and things there on our website, and you are able to access those there. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Great Depression and the New Deal, understanding how these two things work together, and understanding what it was that Franklin Roosevelt was trying to bring about through the New Deal programs that he was creating throughout the time that he was president. So the first thing we need to talk about, I think, is what was the Great Depression? And the Great Depression was a terrible time in American history. And we like to think, and when we teach about the Great Depression, we teach about the Great Depression as starting on October 29th, 1929, when the stock market crashed. And the problem with that is that the Great Depression actually started for many people well before the crash of the stock market. In fact, it started for farmers in the early 1920s. And what happened was, after the First World War, a lot of the soldiers came back. They didn't have jobs. They needed jobs. And so the government gave them a bunch of land and said, here, go farm this land. You be a farmer. And a lot of these guys didn't know how to be farmers. And they tended to not use the land well, or sometimes they overproduced, which drove prices down. And then along came a great drought. And what the drought did was it killed a lot of the crops and it destroyed a lot of the farms. And so this was called the Dust Bowl. And this is what it looks like. Here is a farm, and you can see by looking at this farm that this land is no longer useful, right? This was once a viable farm, but because of the drought, because of the over farming, this land is basically useless. And what happened was the land turned basically into sand. And what happened was a lot of this soil blew away. So when the wind came through, it would pick up the sand and it would blow it all around. And sometimes it would even block out the sky in cities like New York or Baltimore or Washington as the wind was blowing across the Great Plains and across the East Coast. Now, this wasn't not only bad for crops, obviously, but it was also bad for farm animals. So if you were a rancher, your cows had nothing to eat, right? Because the grass was dying because of the great drought, and all of this dust right? We can put a mask on ourselves, you and I, but animals can't do that. So chickens and cows and sheep and those kinds of guys ended up breathing in a lot of this dust, and it killed a lot of them as well. So it was a tremendous, terrible natural disaster that was going on there as well. And that started in the 1920s, and then the drought went on for about 9 years. So when we talk about the Great Depression, we often talk about it as starting with the stock market crash in October of 1929. But let me give you an example of what that really was. The stock market crash was when everybody's attention turned to the Great Depression, right? That got everybody's attention. So it's kind of like this. Have you ever maybe been not feeling so good on a Monday? You're like, oh, I don't feel that good, And you tell your mom or your dad, and they say, well, you had a rough weekend, see how you feel tomorrow, just to rest up and see how you feel. And then the next day, Tuesday rolls around, and you're still not feeling quite up to snuff, and you're saying, well, I still don't really feel like, really that good. And your mom and dad say, well, give it another day. Sometimes it takes a little while to bounce back. And then by Wednesday, you wake up and you're really not feeling good. And mom or dad takes your temperature, right? And they take the temperature and come to find out you got 101-degree temperature, right? That's what the stock market crash was. It was like looking at that thermometer and seeing the 101-degree temperature. You hadn't been feeling well for a few days leading up to that, but that was the thing that really made sure that you were not feeling well and was the definitive evidence that there was really a significant problem. And that's what happened with the crash during the stock market. That was what got everybody's attention. But a lot of people hadn't been feeling good up to that point. Now, the Great Depression, boys and girls, was not great at all. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And at that time, 25% of the people, one out of every four people, didn't have a job. And another 25%, one out of every 25 people, had jobs, but they weren't jobs that were particularly paying much money, right? So they were jobs, but they weren't jobs that really allowed you to, take good care of yourself and have food and shelter and those sorts of things. You're kind of creeping by that way. But it's kind of like if you guys were getting an allowance and you wanted to get like a $5 allowance, right, every week, but you're only getting like a $2 allowance. You could make do with the $2, but not really very well. You'd rather have the $5, right? And so that's kind of what was going on with the economy as well. So some folks didn't have jobs, some folks had jobs that weren't very good, and it was really having an impact on the country. In fact, the suicide rate during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, actually tripled because people felt, well, there's nothing more, I can do. I've lost my job, I've lost my home, and there's no reason to live. Okay, and that, of course, is never a good solution. But that's the way some people took their way out. Always if you get to that point, you should ask for help and look for other help. And apparently, for a lot of people, there was no way out. Now, what happened with this was um, Herbert Hoover, who was president at the time, was trying his best to get things to turn around, right? But President Hoover was a Republican and he was conservative. And his philosophy, right, his personal philosophy was that, the government shouldn't do a lot for people. It's up to people to help each other out and up to people to get through these kinds of situations. There's nothing wrong with that way of thinking. That was just the way that President Hoover thought, and people elected him because most people at that time agreed with that kind of philosophy. But what we saw with the Great Depression was that there needed to be something else. There needed to be more done. And it was difficult for President Hoover to bring himself and bring the Congress to do more because his philosophy was, let's just let it work its way out. Let's let it work its way out. Well, the problem was when you've got a natural disaster like the Great Drought and the Dust Bowl, when you have a situation like the stock market crash, when you have a banking crisis, right, where the banks are running out of money, then what ends up happening is you've got to do something, right? You've got to do something. And people lost faith in Herbert Hoover, and they said, we need somebody else, somebody with more ideas, somebody with more ability to take control and do something about this. And that person, they believed, was Franklin Roosevelt. And this is a picture that sort of sums up the way people were living in the Great Depression. Right, this poor guy, and these guys are all these people here are on a relief line, and here's this poor guy. He's just got a little cup of soup or a cup of coffee or something, and he's standing there, and that's going to be his only meal for the day. That's going to be the only thing he eats that day, and he'll have to come back tomorrow and get another cup of soup. That's how bad things were during the Great Depression. Here is some little kids standing with their dad. They are farmers. And if you look at the picture here, what kinds of things do you see in this picture? Right? How would you describe this picture? Do you want to type in the chat? Do these look like good conditions, bad conditions? Depressing, bad, sad. Yeah, the clothes are ragged. Imagine that if you had to go to school in those clothes, they're skinny, right? Right. Those are all great observations. And these are because these guys don't have enough money, right? They're not making a good living. So they can't fix their clothes. They can't buy new clothes. They're skinny because they can't get a lot of food. They're dirty because they can't buy soap. Maybe they don't have running water at their house. Right? So this is the way a lot of people lived back in. So when Franklin Roosevelt ran for president in 1932, he said, listen, I got some ideas. We got some things we're going to do, and we're going to make some things happen. And because people had felt like, President Hoover wasn't doing enough, and I don't mean that as a criticism of President Hoover, don't get me wrong, he was trying his best, but in this case, his best just wasn't good enough. And so what happened was Franklin Roosevelt said, well, I got some ideas, and here's what we're going to do. You elect me president, and we'll make things happen. We're going to make things occur, and we're going to get things going. And so in 1932, he was elected president, and he became, so you're elected in an even year, 1932. 32 is an even number, and then you take office in 1933. The following year, you take office in the odd year. So now the president is elected in November and doesn't take office until January of the next year, right? So what happened during that time back then was you were elected in November, but you didn't take office until March. So there was 5 months of the old guy kind of basically being done with the job and the new guy not having yet taken over the job. So during that 5 month period, things got worse and worse and worse in the country. People weren't listening to Hoover anymore. Look, you had your chance, you try to get your best, but you just weren't able to do it. We've elected Roosevelt, but he can't do anything yet because he's not taking office, right? He's not in charge of anything yet. And things got worse and worse, worse. And one of the problems that was going on during this time was a thing called the bank crisis. And this worked like this. So let's say this is a bank, right? And if you look closely at that bank, what do you see in that bank? What do we got in that bank? Money. Yeah, money. Woo, right? So we've got all these little bags of money in the bank, right? So that's pretty good. And the way a bank works, boys and girls, is that you put money in the bank and then you put it in the bank and then it's there for you. So when you need it, you go and you take the money out. Now, meanwhile, what the bank does is the bank uses that money to make more money. And the way it works is this. So let's say you get $10 from your grandma for your birthday, right? And you get that $10, thank you, Granny, and you put that $10 into the bank. So then that $10 is in there and it's making money, it's earning interest for you. So what happens is when you go back to the bank, let's say a year or two later, you can take out your $10 plus whatever interest the money has made. So maybe you made $1. So now the original $10 investment in the bank becomes $11. You're making money in the bank. And the way the bank makes the money is as people put their money in, other people borrow the money. So let's say I want to open up a pizza parlor. right? Because I love pizza. And so I wanted to buy a pizza parlor. I got to buy an oven, I got to buy the dough, I got to buy all that stuff. But I don't have enough money myself. So I would go to the bank and I'd say, hey, bank, I'd like to open a pizza parlor in my town and make money by selling pizza. And the bank said, well, you seem like a decent guy and all right, you seem like you have a good plan. So the bank gives me money, and then I use that money to buy the pizza oven, to buy the dough. And then as I make the pizzas and I sell the pizzas, I'm making money on that. And I put a little bit of money back into the bank as interest on the loan. So the idea here is that the bank doesn't just sit there all full of money all the time. That money is going in and going out through various lending things and that sort of stuff. Well, what happened during the 1930s was that the banks were making really bad investments, right? So let's say the guy comes in and he says, I want to open a skunk cabbage restaurant, and it's only going to serve skunk cabbage. And the bank says, oh, okay, so we'll lend you some money. So they lend the guy money to build the skunk cabbage restaurant. And guess what? Nobody wants to eat skunk cabbage. So what happens is that restaurant goes under. Well, that restaurant goes under, then they're not making any money and they can't pay back that loan. So this money is now essentially gone. And what happened in the 30s was a lot of banks were making those kinds of deals, and the banks kept running out of money. More and more money was coming out of the banks, and eventually the bank had very little money left. And what happened was, as the banks began to run out of money, people said, well, you might not be able to get that $10 or $11 from your grandma from your birthday because the bank, they're running out of money. You better get down there before they run completely out of money. And this caused what was called a run on the banks. And so you run down to the bank and you get the last $11, and now the bank is completely empty. Right? That was happening with banks all across the country. I have here, this is my grandma's black pocketbook, most famous black pocketbook. And my grandma always had this black pocketbook. Every time you saw a picture of grandma, she was holding it like this over her shoulder and holding it like this. And what do you think my grandma had in that big black bag? What do you think Granny kept in here? Right, we just talked about how the banks, all of her money, right? Exactly. That's exactly what Granny kept in. My Granny, believe it or not, boys and girls, kept about $30,000 cash in her big black pocketbook. And the reason, yes, it really is her pocketbook. And the reason that she kept that money in there was because during the Great Depression, she went to the bank to get her money out and it was all gone. So what this meant was that she never trusted banks again. And this is what was going on during the Great Depression, right? You saw in this picture, these guys look sad and depressed, right? Grandma doesn't have her money. You lost your $10 of birthday money. This is not a happy time. So President Roosevelt comes in. Um, no, my grandma never got her money back. She never got that money back. And that's why she never trusted banks again. So she kept that money in her big black pocketbook for the rest of her life. And the idea here was that this is no way to run a country, right? You have to have people putting money into the bank so that other people can take money out of the bank and do investments, okay? And that's the way we build things, right? When your mom and dad need a car, they don't save up $40,000 to buy a car, right? They go to the bank and they get a car loan and they pay a little bit back each month for that car. So when Roosevelt comes to the presidency, banks are shutting down, farms are shutting down. It's not a good thing. So President Roosevelt gets in there and he promises action. He says, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and I am going to have some ideas on making things better. And so here is a political cartoon. And if you look at this political cartoon, what you see is this guy over here. Who's this guy over here, do you think? Well, let's go back. Let's start easier. Who's this guy over here? You guys all recognize him, right? Who's the guy with the striped pants? Uncle Sam, right? So he represents our government. And then who do you think this guy over here is? Right. is Uncle Sam, and this is FDR. So this is a cartoon, right? A political cartoon shows kind of it's a way of expressing what's going on. So President Roosevelt comes in and he says to Uncle Sam, "You want, that New Deal? Well, here's the New Deal." And what he's doing is he's dealing out cards into the to Uncle Sam. And on these cards are things like a message to Congress, more plans, a bank holiday, an inaugural address. So all of these things become part of the New Deal. Okay. And Franklin Roosevelt is creating programs that are going to help people. And the way he does this, he explains it by going on the radio and giving a talk. Does anybody know what his talks are called? What were Franklin Roosevelt's radio talks called? Anybody know? Oh, that one. Fireside chats. That's right. President Roosevelt would go on the radio, and this is what radios looked like back in the day, boys and girls. And he would go on the radio and he would explain what it was that he was going to do. And he had a formula that he used, which made up of three parts. And the way it worked was this: he would go on the radio, and the first thing he would do is he would tell people what the problem was. My friends, I want to talk to you tonight about banking, right? Because there's a bank problem. Then he would tell what he was going to do about the problem. And then he would ask people to do something in exchange, and that was going to help the situation. So with the banking crisis, what he did was he went on the radio and he said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I am going to close down the banks in a thing called a bank holiday. We're going to shut these banks down. Then we're going to go in there and we're going to take a look at these banks and find out what's going wrong with them. And we're going to make sure that the strong banks, the banks that are in good condition, will open up at the end of 1 week. So we'll shut all the banks down for a week. And what this did was it kept people from running in and taking out that money. Now, if they had done this before my grandma went down there, right, the bank would have shut down. They would have still had some money. See how there's still some money in there? And then they could have used that money to make more money and pay back my grandma. But they're never able to do that. So Roosevelt says we're going to shut the banks down for 1 week. We're going to make sure that the good, strong banks are able to open up again, and the weak banks that aren't any good, we're going to work with them to become stronger and more useful. So I'm going to talk to you about banking. First part of the formula. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close the banks down on a bank holiday for 1 week. Then here's what I want you to do. At the end of that week, if your bank opens up again, I want you to go and I want you to put your money back in the bank. Because what people were doing, like my grandma, were keeping it in their pocketbooks and their socks, under the mattress. And if the banks open up, he says, President Roosevelt, the banks will open up. And then what we will do is these banks will be safe and secure. And I would like you to put your money back in. And people felt good about this. They felt, hey, you know what? This guy's got a plan. Hoover never asked us to do that. Hoover never explained what he was going to do about the banks. President Roosevelt is, I'm going to trust this guy. So a lot of people took their money from their socks, from their under their mattress, and they put that money back into the bank. And what happened, boys and girls, was over the next 2 months, $2 billion went back into the bank system. $2 billion. And that $2 billion was then able to be used to invest in making the means of production. So the government was able to use that money to create many of the programs of the New Deal. Okay, many of the programs of the New Deal. And what the New Deal basically is sort of like when you're playing a game and you got lousy cards or you got lousy chips or whatever it is you're playing, and it's kind of like a do-over. We're going to do a new deal. We're going to start over. We're going to make things happen differently than they happened before, and that's going to help people out. And what that did was it gave people a sense of confidence. So here is another political cartoon. You've got Captain Roosevelt up here, and he's sailing the ship of state in the sea of confidence. People began to feel like they could trust the banks. People began to feel like they could trust the government. People began to feel like they could, you know, have things happen and work again. So does this sound like a good thing to try or a bad thing to try, the New Deal? What do you think? Good thing, bad thing? Okay, we're getting a good. Sounds good. Couple of goods, right? Okay, great. And that's how a lot of people felt. And there was this sense, here's a political cartoon from March. Okay, this was from March 1932. And you know how they used to say that March comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb? Well, here's a political cartoon that says, okay, here's Roosevelt, right? He's coming in. And what do you think he's going to do to that lion? Tame it, right? He's going to get that lion to start acting like a pussycat, right? From a mean, terrible lion to a pussycat. And if you look on the tail of the lion, it says financial crisis. So Roosevelt is coming in and he's going to handle that financial crisis. He's going to make sure that those banks are safe again. And that was just one of the things that he did. In fact, what he did was in the first 100 days he was president, on the first 100 days he was in office, he passed 16 major pieces of legislation. Okay, 16 major pieces of legislation. So what that means is that he really got actively involved in getting things done and making things happen. Now, this comes to be called the New Deal. And the reason that he's creating the New Deal is he wants to create jobs for people. Okay, kick him out. Why do you think Roosevelt wants to create jobs? Why are creating jobs and giving people jobs such an important thing to do? Okay, so we're getting some answers here. So people could make money, so they can make money. Okay, right. Okay, so the idea is if I have a job, I'm making a little bit of money. Okay. And Roosevelt understood that because he understood if I have a job, what are you going to do with that job? Well, I'm going to have a job and I'm going to make some money. And then with that money, I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend that money. So I'm going to use a little bit of this money to buy some bubble gum. So now the bubble gum factory has to make bubble gum, right? They got to hire people to make bubble gum. I'm going to use this money, some of this money, to go out and go to a movie. So the movie companies and the movie theaters have to hire people to work in the movie factories, right? And in the movie theaters and things. So by having money, what it does is having a job and having money, it helps you to stimulate the economy because you begin to spend that money. And as you're spending that money, you're asking other people to do things for that money, and that begins to build up more jobs and more jobs and more jobs. But did you want to know something? There's something that Roosevelt felt was even more important than giving people jobs to make money. And the thing was this: President Roosevelt understood that when you have a job, you have a purpose. Okay. And when you have a job, you have a purpose, you have something to do. And that was really important because remember, we said a lot of people in the Great Depression lost hope. And so what happened was they didn't see any reason, oh, what am I supposed to do? Oh, right? But no, 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 now we're going to give you a job. We're going to make so we have jobs so that you can go out there and have a little bit of money. But more importantly, you have a purpose. So think about this. Let's say you are on the soccer team, right? And you're a really good soccer player and you're playing soccer. And, some people say, oh, hey, you're on the soccer team, right? So you're kind of identified as a soccer player, right? Hey, let's say that's part of who Julie is. She likes to play soccer, right? That's part of who Jim is. He's a soccer player. But now let's say something happens and you're thrown off the team, right? You go to practice one day and the coach says, sorry, we got too many kids signed up. We're going to have to cut the team and you're no longer on the team, Julie, or you're no longer on the team, John. How do you think that makes you feel? How's Julie and John going to feel if suddenly they are not part of the soccer team anymore. Sad, annoyed, bad, lonely, right? That's how people felt during the Great Depression. So what President Roosevelt wanted to do was to get them jobs so that they had some money and they could help stimulate the economy, but even more important, so that they had a purpose, something to do, right? Something to do. You ever notice on a Saturday, you get up and your mom says, okay, you got soccer practice, and then we're going to go have lunch. And after lunch, we're going over to Aunt Julie's. And before we do that, before we go to soccer practice, I need you to clean your room. So you clean your room, we'll go to soccer practice, we'll have lunch, and we'll go over to Aunt Julie's, right? And you got a plan, right? You've got an agenda for the day. But have you ever had a situation where you wake up on a Saturday and you say, Mom, Dad, what are we doing today? And I'm like, oh, we have nothing planned. So what do you tend to do with that day? Had nothing planned. What do you tend to do with that day? Sit around, watch TV, be lazy. Oh, go for a bike ride. That's good. Right, right. But two out of the three answers are not productive. Right? Read a book. That's great. Good. So yeah. So the idea of this is, if I don't have a job, then or a purpose or a function, I'm going to fill my day with other things. Some of them might be good, like reading a book, going for a bike ride. Some of them may not be so good, right? Just sit around and watch TV, be lazy, that sort of thing. So President Roosevelt wanted to give people a job because it gave them money and it also gave them a purpose. And so what he does is he creates a program called the New Deal, which is actually a whole bunch of different ideas about jobs. Anybody want to take a guess at how many New Deal programs there were? How many New Deal programs do you think President Roosevelt created? 50, we got to go a bit of 50, 50, we got a bit of 50, 51, 64, 164, 164, 33. We got a bit of 33, 33, 33, 164, 50, 134, 164, 50, 33. Well, that's good. You guys are close. There were actually over 40 programs of the New Deal. Over 40 programs of the New Deal. Have you guys ever heard of a thing called the periodic table of the elements? You may not have gotten to that yet in your school. Oh, you have? Yep. Okay, good. Chemistry, right. All right. So you know how there's the periodic table of the elements? Well, we put together a periodic table of the New Deal. So this shows the New Deal programs, boys and girls. There's over 40 programs of the New Deal, and there were a lot of people that helped President Roosevelt. Okay. And these programs were very often known as alphabet soup programs because if you look at them, they're identified by their initials. So here's the CCC, we've got the NRA, we've got the AAA over here, we've got the FSA. So these programs were known very often by their initials. So the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that was a program that took young men and it put them to work. Okay. And this was I want to focus on this program because this was a program that was really, really helpful to a lot of people. So let's say you got a big brother, right? Who's 17 or 18 years old, right? He's hanging around the house. And that big brother eats a lot, doesn't he? Right? How many times you go to get a cookie, go to get some ice cream, and you find out there is no cookie, there is no ice cream because your big brother ate, right? Your big brother is eating your parents out of house and home. So one of the job programs that FDR came up with, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, took people like your big brother and said, you guys, you don't have a job, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you and put you out at a camp out in the wilderness. And in that wilderness, you are going to build pathways for people to go on hikes. You're going to build campsites for people to go camping. You're going to build towers so people can look in with binoculars and see if there's fires in the forests. So the CCC took young men and it put them to work out in the wilderness. Sometimes if there were big empty fields like we saw with those farm fields, then they would put them to work planting trees. So if you were 18 to 24 years old, you would join the CCC, you'd leave your family, go to a camp, and at that camp, you would get 3 nice meals a day, and you would have a nice warm roof over your head. So you can see, remember these guys I showed you earlier, those young boys and the farmer? Where's that picture? Well, you remember those guys, right? Imagine like suddenly they have an opportunity to go and work in these camps. I'll answer that question about girls in just a second. So now these guys go out to the camp and they're not going to get skinny anymore because they got 3 square meals a day. They had a nice warm place to sleep. And during the day, they're out there doing productive stuff, building these trails, building these campsites, and those sorts of things. Then those guys get paid $1 a day. So they're making $30 every month, right? Because most months have 30 days in it on average. So they get $30. So now they've got a $30 of money coming in, but they don't get that money. That money goes to their parents. Now, somebody just said that seems like not a lot. Well, that's not a lot, okay, but that's quite a good amount of money during the Great Depression. If you were making $1 a day and you were 18 years old, that was good money back in the Great Depression. Because keep in mind, they're giving you free food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you have a free place to stay. So you get this $30. And when the $30 gets given to you, what the government would do is they would take that $30, and from that 30, they would give you five as the young man. Here's your $5. And the other $25 they would send back home to your family. So your mom and dad could pay the rent. So your mom and dad could buy your baby sister, a new dress for school. So you're making $1 a day. $5 of that each month goes to you. 25 goes back to your mom and dad. So this is helping a lot of people. It's helping the young men because they are getting 3 square meals a day and a nice place to eat or sleep rather, and they're helping the community by building these trails and these campsites and those sorts of things. The families are being helped because they're getting that $25 a month. And what they discover is that the crime rate goes down in cities because they're getting the young men out of the cities, right? Usually when we talk about gangs, and crime, right, it's usually young men, right? So the crime rate goes down. The families are getting some help. The guys are getting 3 square meals and some money, and the community is getting things built. This is what the New Deal was looking to do. The New Deal was looking to help people out. And they did it through over 40 programs of the New Deal. You can see them there on our periodic table. Teachers, if you would like a physical copy of the periodic table, I would be happy to mail you a free copy. Simply send me your email, through email, send me your address, and I will get a copy in the mail to you that you can have in your classroom. Now, Jefferson Elementary School asks, were girls a part of the CCC too? Well, they weren't exactly a part of the CCC. Eleanor Roosevelt thought that they should be, and so they created a set of camps that were called, and their organization was called the She, because it was only for girls. And what that did was it brought girls out of cities and it took them to these camps out in the country. And there they learned how to do some typing. They learned some homemaking skills and those sorts of things. So it wasn't quite the same as the boys' camp, but it did get them out of the city for a little while, and they were able to learn some skills there as well. So this was one example of of the kinds of things that the New Deal was doing. You learned about Eleanor Roosevelt on Tuesday. She was great. You're totally right. She was totally awesome. One of my favorite people of the 20th century, Eleanor Roosevelt. Totally love her. Now, if you look at this, right, there's lots of these initials, okay, lots of these alphabet soup programs. But what I want you to remember is 3 letters, okay? 3 letters. And those 3 letters are the 3 R's, okay? Because all of these programs of the New Deal, the thing that tied them all together, some of them were helping farmers, some of them were helping bankers, some of them were helping construction workers, some of them were helping families, all kinds of people were helped through the various programs. But the thing that tied them all together were the three R's. And those three R's were relief, recovery, and reform. Okay, the New Deal was created to bring relief to people, recovery to the economy, and reform to our system so that we didn't have another Great Depression. So, any program you can think about through the New Deal, you take a look at that and you think, okay, Agricultural Adjustment Act, that was helping out farmers. It's bringing relief and recovery to the farmers. Okay. Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, it's bringing relief and recovery to the young men that were working in the camp. So repeat after me, the three R's: relief, recovery, reform. Okay, that's what this was designed to do: relief, recovery, and reform. Now, let me give you an example of how that works in real life. Okay, so let's say, what does it mean, relief, recovery, reform? How does that work? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say it's Friday night. It's tomorrow night. You got some friends over. You're watching a movie. Your mom or dad makes you popcorn, and you're eating popcorn, right? Oh yeah, yum 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 yum. And then you get to the bottom of the bowl, and you run out of popcorn. And you have those little hard kernels that are still in there, those little parts that didn't pop. Let's say you bite one of those, and all of a sudden, ow, you crack your tooth. Okay, it hurts, right? Now, it's 9 o'clock at night. The dentist isn't open. So what do? Well, your mom gives you some ice and she puts that on there. Maybe she gives you some aspirin to take away the pain. And this is the first R, relief, right? She's helping you have relief. Then the second thing she does is the next morning, she ends up taking you to the dentist, and the dentist goes in there and he drills out the crack and he puts in a filling, and your tooth is back to normal, right? That is the recovery. And then as you're leaving the dentist says, hey, don't eat those hard little kernels, eat the white, fluffy popcorn part. Otherwise you'll crack your tooth again. That's the idea of reform. You're learning what not to do to create the problem back again. And so the New Deal programs are all designed to bring about relief, recovery, and reform. Just like you crack a tooth, a little ice, a little aspirin, that's the relief. The recovery is you get the tooth working again, and the reform is don't eat the popcorn like that again. Relief, recovery, and reform. Now, here's a couple questions coming in. The question is, why did FDR later feel he needed to add justices to the Supreme Court? That is a great question. So a lot of people were going along with these New Deal programs, and it was helping people out, and it was giving people a sense of confidence. And people felt like, hey, this is better than when Hoover was here because things are actually happening. But then what happened was some people started to feel like maybe these New Deal programs are going too far. Maybe Roosevelt is doing too much. Roosevelt was a Democrat and he was what's called a liberal. So he believed in trying lots of things, right? Remember, we said Hoover was a Republican and a conservative. So their attitude is try less things, right? Don't do as much. And Democrats like to do a lot, Republicans like to do less. And that doesn't mean one is good or one is bad. Sometimes there's times when you got to do a lot of things. Sometimes there's things when you don't have to do a lot of things. So it's just a matter of approach. How are these guys going to solve the problem? So what happened was the deal was that the as people began to think, well, maybe he's doing too much. Some of the New Deal programs were challenged in the courts. Hey, is it really okay to shut down a bank for a week? Hey, is it really okay to help out farmers? And so these questions went to the Supreme Court, and the court had to decide these things. And some of the decisions they were making were taking away some of the New Deal programs. And Roosevelt said, gee, we really need these programs. So we got to add more people to the court, people that will be in favor of the New Deal programs. And that's why he tried to add people to the court. And he was perfectly within his rights as president to do that. But it was kind of like stacking the deck, right? It was kind of like, picking all your favorite best friends to play on one team when, you don't have enough people for the other team. And this was seen as something that he shouldn't have done. And it ended up that, a lot of people saw this as kind of a not smart thing for him to do. Now, but he ended up not adding people to the Supreme Court. It ended up staying at 9, and then they sort of began to change their minds and began to be, less against the New Deal. Did the programs end the Depression, or did World War II do that? The programs of the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. Okay, what the programs of the New Deal did was they got people through it. Okay, like you guys said, $30 a month isn't a whole lot of money, but it'll keep you alive, right? It'll keep you going through. And so what the New Deal programs did was they ended up, thank you, Teresa. What the New Deal programs did was it ended up keeping things working for the time being, right? It ended up bringing about that relief and that recovery until full recovery could come along and full reform could come along. So it didn't end, the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. World War II did that because once we got into the war, suddenly all the young men that needed jobs went into the military, and women went into factories and made tanks and planes and ships and supplies. And so when you're fighting a war, you need a lot of equipment, you need a lot of manpower, and that's what actually brought us ultimately out of the Great Depression. But here's what I'm going to tell you. The New Deal programs created almost half the infrastructure in the United States because the New Deal programs, things like the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, they put people to building things. They put people to work building hospitals and schools and libraries and roads and waterways and airports and parks and streets and sidewalks. These were all things that the government was helping build, giving people jobs to build these things. And that equipment, that infrastructure helped us to fight the war when World War II came along. So the New Deal didn't end the Great Depression, but it certainly helped us to get through it. Did FDR lose any money in the financial crisis? No, he was in pretty good shape. He didn't lose money in banks. Much of his money was in investments in other things like stocks and things like that, companies and stuff. So he didn't end up losing a lot of money that way. But he understood that other people did. He understood people like my grandma, right? By no fault of her own, she goes down to the bank one day, it's all gone, right? And she never got over that. Franklin Roosevelt created a program called the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And what that did was it said the government will back the money that you put in there. So if you put your $10 from your grandma for your birthday into the bank, no matter what happens to that bank, the government will make sure you get your $10 back. So if the bank burns up, if the bank blows away, if the bank gets washed away in a river, if somebody robs the bank, if the bank loses all their money through bad investments, you don't have to worry. The government will make sure that you get your $10 back. And what that does is it makes people feel more confident. So really, I can put my money in here and I know I'm going to get it back. There's nothing can go wrong. I'm going to get this money back. That's right. The government guarantees your money back. All right, then if that's the case, I got nothing to lose. I'll put my money in the bank. And then once that money's in the bank can use that money to give out loans and make other things, to help the economy and such. Okay, so that is the way that the New Deal helped us. The New Deal was a big set of programs designed to bring about the 3 R's, which are right, relief, recovery, and reform. Right. So Lakewood Elementary wants to know, did my grandma ever meet FDR? My grandma never met FDR, but my grandma did meet Eleanor Roosevelt because FDR died in 1945 and Mrs. Roosevelt lived on until 1962. And right here in Hyde Park, my grandma lived in a place called Poughkeepsie, which is right next to Hyde Park. It's like the next town over. And sometimes my grandma would run into Mrs. Roosevelt in the grocery store. Sometimes she would run into Mrs. Roosevelt when my uncle graduated high school. Mrs. Roosevelt was at the graduation, and my grandma was able to meet her there. So Mrs. Roosevelt was a really like regular guy, down to earth, just going out there shopping where everybody shop. Yeah, she was super duper nice. My grandma said she always had time for people. She was always interested in what you were doing and really took an interest in the welfare of people and what people were asking for. And so the big moral of the story here, boys and girls, is that government is supposed to work for us, right? Government is supposed to make what we need to have happen happen. And we need to make sure that we let them know what it is that we need. We have to find our voice and say, hey, government, we need help, right? President Hoover, you're not doing enough. We need help from somebody else. That's why they elected Franklin Roosevelt. And the way you make your voice heard, boys and girls, is by voting. Now, you're too young to vote just yet, but someday you're going to be able to vote. And maybe you can start right in your own classroom, teachers. Maybe you can have the students vote about, I don't know, like who a class mascot, or maybe a class logo, or maybe do we go out for recess before lunch or after lunch? And this will give people, an idea and some practice on voting, because sometimes when you vote, you get what you want, but sometimes when you vote, you don't get what you want. And you have to learn to live with either of those two ways it works out. Sometimes you get what you want, sometimes you don't get what you want. If you don't get what you want, then you have to use your voice to say, hey, we really need this. This is what we really want. And maybe in the next vote, you'll get a little bit more from that. So let's open it up to any other questions or comments or concerns that you might have. New Deal, all about creating programs, creating jobs. Why? Job creates a paycheck, gives you money, but also gives you a purpose. The New Deal was designed to bring about relief, recovery, and reform, get people working again, get the money flowing again, and get people through the Great Depression. And it did that. And it was World War II that actually brought us out of the war, but it was a situation where we really needed those programs. What was the most successful New Deal program? I would argue that the most successful New Deal program was a thing called Social Security. Ask your grandmas and grandpas about it. And the way Social Security works is this: when you grow up and you get a job, you'll get some money. And then what the government will do is the government will take some of that money out of your paycheck and they put it in a fund for Social Security. And what Social Security does is it makes sure that there's money there for if you get to be too old and you can't work anymore, or something happens to you on the job and you get injured and you can't work anymore, or if your mom or dad dies, that the government will be able to provide your other, the other parent that's still alive, some money to help you get through things. So Social Security was probably the most successful, because what it does is it takes a little bit of money out, puts it into this program, and then when you get to be a certain age, 67 years old, then you start to get some of that money back later on. So you'll get it back later on in time. Do I have a favorite New Deal program? Yeah, I think my favorite New Deal program is the CCC, the one that I talked about, because I love to be outside. I love to be out in nature. I love to take walks. And I think it's important for young people to get those skills, right? To get those job skills, to get out there in the nature and do those types of things too. You're welcome. What is the NRA? The NRA back in Roosevelt's time was a thing called the National Recovery Administration. And what that did was it made it so that it was a group of ideas to bring about some standards for how people were doing jobs, okay, and how business was going to work. So what the National Recovery Administration was they said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay people at least this much for a job, and we're going to pay certain amounts. And what this did was it sort of it leveled the playing field for workers and employers. Okay, so that was what the NRA did. So it made sure that, so like, let's say one person is paying $80 a week and somebody else is paying $20 a week. So let's say we all agree to pay at least $30 a week. That way everybody makes at least that much. The AAA was the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And what that did was sometimes that paid farmers not to plant all their land. So if you have 100 acres and let's say 100 acres and you plant peas and you bring 100 acres of peas to the market, the price of the peas goes down because there's so many of them, right? They can get them anywhere. So what the government did was say, look, rather than everybody bringing in peas, here's what we'll do. We'll pay you to only plant 50 acres. So you get 50 acres of peas to the market. And what that does is it makes them a little bit more scarce. And when they're scarce, the price begins to go up. It's like if your class got a pizza, right? And you open it up and your teacher buys you pizza and you open it up, there's all these slices of pizza. Hey, everybody gets their slice, right? But then somebody wants a second slice and you open it up and there's one slice left. Right now, what happens? Right? You're ready to go for that piece, right? There's competition for that one piece. So the idea was not to bring so many pieces or so many peas to the market. What were health conditions like in the camps of the CCC? The health conditions in the CCC camps were very, very good. These guys were eating good meals. They were getting a lot of exercise. They were getting fresh air every day. They were drinking good water, and they were getting much better situations and much better food and much better care than they were going to get at home. Right? If you're living in a crowded city, right, it's kind of dirty. There's all kinds of people around, but you're living out in, think about camping, right? You're out there, the fresh air, the good food, the hard work. You're really getting good conditioning. And it really helped a lot of these guys sort of beef up from being those sort of skinny kids that we saw in that other thing to, you're working out there, you're getting some exercise every day, you're getting good food, you're getting a good night's sleep because it's nice and quiet out there. You're tired after working all day, and there you go. Okay, relief, recovery, reform. That's what I want you to remember about the New Deal. You can look into the individual programs more carefully and more closely, and you should. But remember, everything in there, relief, recovery, and reform. If you're interested in having your own copy of the periodic table of the New Deal, please send me an email and I will have a copy out to you, lickety split.